At the end of the day, processed foods help us to feed ourselves, and as a dietitian, that is what matters to me the most. This may come as a surprise, but I'm a dietitian and I recommend processed foods. I know. Many people have this idea that dietitians are just recommending fruits and vegetables and whole foods. And while I am quite keen on fruits and veggies, it does not mean there isn't room for other foods too. In this video, I want to go over what processed foods actually are. We're going to go over why the internet and your Aunt Sharon are telling you that they are bad. I'm going to tell you why I think that processed foods can actually be healthy. And at the end, I will share some of my favorite processed foods that I eat on a daily basis as a registered dietitian. So first things first, what are processed foods? Simply put, processed foods are any food that is altered in any way from its natural state. This may be surprising, but almost every food that we eat is processed in some way. Forms of food processing may include freezing, chopping, dicing, canning, cooking, drying. When you hear the term processed food, you might picture Cheetos and Coca-Cola, but baby carrots and almonds are also processed foods. Less processed, sure, but still processed. Food processing occurs on a spectrum. We have some foods that are just lightly processed, like canned corn, nut butter, ground beef, for example. Comparatively, only a few steps are needed to process these foods. Other foods are more highly processed, like soda, salami, ice cream. These ultra-processed foods often require more steps and more ingredients to get them from their starting point to that finished product that you see on the shelves at the grocery store. Some processed foods may have additives like emulsifiers, thickeners, preservatives, flavoring, coloring, and although diet culture and wellness culture would disagree, these ingredients are generally safe, at least in the amounts that we're typically consuming them. Yes, even if they have scary sounding names that you aren't quite sure how to pronounce. Not eating foods with ingredients that you can't pronounce is just another diet culture rule. Food additives are regulated by the FDA to ensure their safety. And again, the dose makes the poison. We cannot call a food toxic or poisonous without mentioning the dose at which it becomes toxic or poisonous. All right, at this point, this may have all been sort of a shock to your system if you've been told your entire life that processed foods are just terrible for you. But why are processed foods said to be bad? I am willing to bet good money that you have probably been told at some point in your life that you should avoid processed foods. Where did you first hear that food rule? I'm sure for me, it was some social media post by some Fitspo girly talking about clean eating or the paleo diet or something like that. Misinformation like that just runs rampant on the internet, as we know. One of the biggest culprits of encouraging us to avoid processed foods is the clean eating movement. Clean eating is a type of restrictive diet that involves eating food in its most natural state possible. Clean eaters often tout the benefits of eating whole foods, and they're usually the first to demonize the processed foods. You know the type. They're the ones to tell you to drink raw milk, only eat the grass-fed ground beef that costs like $17 a pound, drinking out of their alkaline water bottles. Clean eating really has no formal definition, and clean eaters almost definitely are including some processed foods in their diet. Like I mentioned, almost every food that we consume is processed in some way. What's even more ironic is when the clean eaters talk about eating whole foods and they demonize processed foods, but they at the same time have a very elaborate supplement routine. And this just goes to show how inconsistent the clean eating diet is. So to answer the question of are processed foods unhealthy, you've probably already gathered this, but the short answer is no. Processed foods can be and almost definitely will be a part of a healthy diet. Again, I gotta say this before I get all the crazy comments. Whole foods are very nutritious. I'm not advocating against whole foods, fruits and vegetables, lean proteins, but just because whole foods are nutrient dense, this does not mean that processed foods are automatically unhealthy. Food and nutrition do not exist in a binary. Food is not either good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. Different foods just contain different ratios of nutrients and serve different purposes. And even beyond that point, it's okay to eat food for reasons beyond just its nutrient composition. Food is fun, food is emotional, food is cultural, food is comforting. It is so much more than just fuel. Food definitely is fuel, don't get me wrong, but it serves so many other purposes besides just that one factor. My point is that it is possible to recognize that whole foods are nutritious and health promoting without demonizing processed foods. All foods can fit. I'm gonna get that tattooed on my forehead. And I'm gonna prove it to you next. Let's go over some ways that processed foods can actually be health promoting. What are some of the benefits of eating processed foods? First of all, processed foods help us to get our nutrients in. All foods offer nutrition, including both whole foods and processed foods. In fact, some processed foods can even be considered nutrient dense. Some examples include canned salmon, which is high in protein and omega-3s, chia seeds, which are rich in fiber and protein and omega-3s, and canned beans that have lots of fiber and iron. The second benefit of processed foods is that they can help you to eat more fruits and vegetables. Wellness culture will tell you that fresh is best and that you should only choose organic, but this is untrue. You can eat conventional, non-organic produce, and you can choose fresh, canned, or frozen. Choose what you prefer, what's available to you, and what you can afford. My third pro of processed foods is that they make food taste good. You know how a meal always tastes better when you add sauces and dressings and condiments? Well, you don't need to make all of these from scratch. Buying a garlic aioli or some everything bagel seasoning means that you are buying processed foods, but that's okay. On a similar note, my next pro of processed foods is that processed foods make making meals easier. Cooking everything from scratch can be exhausting, it's time consuming, and also pretty pricey too sometimes. Using convenience items like enchilada sauce, quick cook rice, pasta sauce, frozen waffles, these types of things can make your life so much easier. And my final pro of processed foods that I want to mention is that processed foods can simply bring us some pleasure. It is okay to eat foods that are not nutrient dense. Because like I said, food is so much more than just fuel. We all know that we're not eating Takis or Cheetos for fiber and vitamin D, and that's okay. We eat them because they taste good, they're nostalgic, it's what we have access to, and these are all okay reasons to choose to eat a certain food. As I mentioned, I eat processed foods every single day as a dietitian, and I encourage my clients to do the same. Some foods that I eat are more processed, some of them are less processed, but again, most of the food you're getting at the grocery store is gonna be processed in some shape or another. Even if you do have a farm or you grow your own vegetables, the minute you wash off your carrots or slice an apple, you have processed it. That said, I want to list off some of my favorite processed foods that I have on a regular basis. The first one is Greek yogurt. High in protein, Greek yogurt makes a great addition to smoothies or as the base of parfaits for breakfast and snacks. When it comes to my parfaits, I like to add granola, berries, and chia seeds for an extra fiber boost too. Next up, bread. Oh man, I love bread. And I do not discriminate when it comes to the type of bread. Diet culture loves to demonize bread and tell us that it is causing weight gain, it's inflammatory, yada yada yada. But bread is a staple in the Dietitian Hannah kitchen. Next on my list is cheese, of course. Cheese is super filling because it has protein and fats. One of my daily go-to snacks is some variation of cheese, nuts, and a piece of fruit. With fat, fiber, and protein, a snack like that keeps me nice and full for a while. Another one of my favorite processed foods is hummus. Speaking of snacking, I love hummus with some veggies like bell pepper, carrots, cucumber, along with some naan bread or some crackers. And whether it is homemade or store-bought, all hummus is going to be processed. You can't get hummus on a tree. And lastly, although this list is not exhaustive, one of my other favorite processed foods that I always have on hand is canned beans. I always have a stockpile of a variety of canned beans, including black beans, pinto beans, chickpeas. Beans are a nutrient powerhouse, and I especially love canned beans because they are just ready to go to add to any dish that I'm making. So bottom line, should you be avoiding processed foods? As a dietitian, my answer is no. There is no need to avoid processed foods. In fact, it's going to be nearly impossible to avoid processed foods. And speaking from experience, sometimes that persistent avoidance of processed foods just will lead you to a slippery slope of disordered eating habits. Remember that food processing occurs on a spectrum, and there are some foods that are more processed and some that are less processed. And it likely is not going to feel very good to only eat those ultra processed foods. As a dietitian, I am not encouraging that you just eat ultra processed foods. But this does not mean that those types of foods are not allowed to be on our plate. At the end of the day, processed foods help us to feed ourselves, and as a dietitian, that is what matters to me the most. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you leave a like if you enjoyed it, and while you're down there, make sure you subscribe so you always know when I'm posting new videos like this one. Thanks again for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time.